Hi, everybody. My name is Amy Miller, and I am a teacher in Hillsborough County, Florida, and I am really excited to share this session with you all about using inquiry projects to drive student learning and also keeping student engagement at the heart of everything we do. I'm sure at this point the housekeeping is old news. The chat feature is available for you to use. We prefer if you use that or the Q&A. Matt Mormon's going to be helping me. He's up in Kalamazoo, Michigan right now. And hey, Matt. And we are going to jump in. Here's what we're going to be covering. We're going to start with the importance of student inquiry. And then we're going to talk about how to implement TCI inquiry projects in the classroom. I know that there are a variety of inquiry projects that we've probably created ourselves as teachers, and you may have gotten some from other sources. We're going to focus, because this is TCI, we're going to focus on the TCI inquiry projects themselves. I do want to let you know, we'll go through as we go through it, that it's based on sound research, and then the processing, planning, and next steps. Because I'm a teacher working with teachers, you'll probably find that I do a little planning and give you some tips for next steps as we go through it, because I think that's just more valuable as we go through a lesson to show you different pieces that you could differentiate. But that's my style, and hopefully it will work. And also, if it's not and you have questions, you can throw those in the chat. Well, let's start with why we should use inquiry projects. So thinking about planning by design, I used to say, oh, yes, I use inquiry. I have my essential question. Yes, the essential question is really important. And each student's authentic path along that essential question is important. Over time, I found that inquiry projects are much easier to implement than I realized. And for one, we can compact our curriculum to focus on specific concepts of a unit. And so that you can get a lot of bang for your buck by not having to go through every single part of a lesson. You can group lessons together and look for a common thread, and then use an inquiry project to assess students and to have students engage with that. You also can use it to enhance the unit of study. So that definitely gives that extra element that you can use to enhance. The differentiation piece has been really fun to discover, because once you start using some inquiry projects and you realize how to use them, then you find so many different pieces to differentiate and also to make them your own. So this isn't just about, oh, hey, like me as a teacher, you can make these your own, and your students can make them their own, which leads me to the empowering students to take accountability for their learning. And I put that last because truly it's their owning their learning with these inquiry projects. I do want to take a moment to point out, you can use inquiry projects. You can have students create them with others, or you could have them individualized. It's up to you. So TCI has 4 different inquiry projects embedded in our curriculum. A structured inquiry, as you can imagine, has a lot more teacher structure to it. One of the fun parts is that you can take some of that structure and you can put it into the others to help your students be successful if they need it. And I'll talk to you about that a little bit today. A guided inquiry, you can kind of be the guide on the side and facilitate that with them. Embedded action is going to get them to take action throughout the inquiry project. And then student directed, that is much more open. They create their own inquiry questions, and they do their own research to support their own questions. And teacher tip, you probably want to start the year off with something other than student directed. Just, you might want to kind of guide and model for them, and then, or provide some extra structure with those student directed. These structured inquiries, primary source heavy. We want to make sure that we are supporting them every step of the way. And you'll see the lesson highlighted here is the rise of civilizations. Guided inquiry, we took one from the 8th grade program for that, Revolution. Embedded action, forming a new nation. We took one from there to highlight for you if you're a U.S. history teacher. And then the open-ended, where they create their own questions. That's in Foundations of History. Again, I think it might be a teacher choice on my end that I prefer less open-ended at the very beginning. But hey, you do you. All right, so I chose a lesson to highlight with this inquiry project to see what women looks like in TCI and our Civics Alive program, because I find our civics program to be really fun and engaging. And my students like to find out what limitations are. Middle schoolers love to expand, to like defy the limitations, if you will. So I am choosing to highlight this lesson. So this comes from Unit 4, the rights and responsibilities of citizens. And our unit projects, our units themselves, they have a video that opens them up. So let's take a
In
look.
1965, students Mary Beth Tinker, John Tinker, and Christopher Eckhart wore black armbands to their Des Moines, Iowa schools to protest the Vietnam War. This violated school district policy, and all three were suspended. The students' families sued the Des Moines School Board, and the case eventually went to the highest court in the country. In 1969, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the students. It stated that the students' right to wear armbands was protected as free speech under the First Amendment. However, the court also acknowledged that schools can censor speech if it causes material interference with school activities. This 1969 decision was not the final word on First Amendment rights in schools. Federal courts continue to hear cases that challenge school policies. Sometimes the courts rule in favor of the students, and other times in favor of the schools. Each ruling helps define what schools can and cannot censor. Imagine you're an expert on speech rights in schools. A school district comes to you for advice on whether student speech is protected by law. You and your colleagues consider the scenario presented by the school district and research existing court cases to determine if the speech or behavior should be allowed in school. By doing this, you will help answer the question, what are the freedoms and limits of school speech?
Okay, so that's going to be our compelling question throughout the course of this unit. What are the limitations of freedom of speech in schools? So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go into the inquiry project and I'm going to identify what parts of the inquiry project are my kids going to need from lesson 11, 12, and 13 so that they can be successful. So I'm going to go into the inquiry project. We have our video right there. And then the inquiry project itself is going to, they're going to be given a scenario and they're going to have to see how it relates to the First Amendment. So what they're going to need to be able to do that is they're going to have to go back and we're going to have to start with lesson 11, which has to do with the Bill of Rights. And they're going to have to learn about what the Bill of Rights and the First Amendment are. Okay. Then for question number 2, consider what we know about the freedoms and limits of school speech. Find court cases that relate to your assigned scenario. And remember that case law comes from courts at the state and local level, as well as from the Supreme Court. So what would my students need to know to be successful in that? Well, that comes from lesson 12. So you're going to see how we go through that lesson to make them get what they need to be successful in that. And then based on what you learned in the court cases, do you think the behavior in the scenario should be allowed? Use evidence to support your answer. Well, the best part about this is that I'm going to go ahead and pull up these scenarios for you so that you can see them. I think I can just. Okay, so there are 5 different scenarios that you can give to the kids in your groups. Scenario 1, During a school election, a candidate uses a slogan that has two meanings, one of which is a drug reference. Should they or should they not be allowed to, is that protected speech or not protected speech? Scenario 2, a student comes to class with tape over his mouth to protest meat in school lunches. He refuses to remove the tape during class. Scenario 3, an after-school club wants to use school funds to go on a field trip to participate in a religious activity. Scenario 4, a student wears a t-shirt with a list of words that are non-offensive and promote positivity. However, the first letter of each word spells out a swear word. Scenario 5, a journalism student publishes an article in the school newspaper that criticizes the school district and certain school board members for cutting arts programs. So these are the 5 different scenarios. You can choose these 5. You can choose, you can create your own. You can narrow them down. Each group of students would get one scenario though. So they wouldn't have to do all 5. They just have to work in their group to work on one of them to then determine whether or not that is protected speech or not. The best part about these, especially with teenagers, is that they really get their emotions involved and it's what they think should or shouldn't happen. And then you get to remind them that it's not based on your emotions, it's based on what the courts have ruled previously. So with that in mind, let's get into what our students would need to be successful. So the first lesson in this unit with this compelling storyline is the Bill of Rights and Civil Liberties. So I'm going to go into this lesson and I'm going to just jump into the classroom activity slideshow because if you put your hand over your heart, that's the heart of TCI is these hands-on activities. And for the rights and responsibilities, we start right off with this preview about a middle school principal has reason to suspect some students are bringing weapons onto campus. And after receiving a tip from a teacher, the principal searches the lockers of 3 students and finds a knife in one student's locker, and the other 2 lockers turned up nothing. Did the principal have the right to search the lockers? Why or why not? And then, what rights do they have? And we get into the 4th Amendment. And what powers does the principal have? And where did these answers come from? The introduction, the text. We need text-based evidence. So they get their emotions get up there, and then you get to go in and say, well, legally, or this is what we're looking at. So they go through this lesson and they perform little mini dramas about the protection of their rights. And throughout the course of this lesson, they learn about their First Amendment right. They also learn about the court's role in protecting our rights. So if you get down to what is the role of the Supreme Court today, and then in the lesson after this, they get into the different roles of or the different levels of courts and their systems. We'll get to that in just a moment. But section 2 is essential for them to be successful in this inquiry project because that one is about the First Amendment rights. So for them to be able to do the inquiry project, they need some background knowledge on First Amendment rights. And this section talks about the different parts of the First Amendment, the 5 different parts, and they also identify court cases. And some of these court cases can be used in their inquiry project. It's a great starting point. So they go through the first 5. Then at this point, if you're compacting your curriculum and you're just focused in on that just the inquiry project itself, then you can stop after reading the second section, the First Amendment rights, and go back into that inquiry project and just leave that. If you want, you can continue on with the different rights in the Bill of Rights. And this particular lesson carries on. So that is the first lesson that we need for our students to be successful with these inquiry projects. The second one has to do with law, liberty, and interpreting the US Constitution. And so with this one, they go into Supreme Court decisions and how that's affected the United States. And they connect visual symbols to key concepts related to law, liberty, and the US Constitution. And they get to play a drawing game and a quiz game, test their knowledge. So again, you see that we're keeping engagement. But we go through the historical codes of law, touches on the Magna Carta, the main role of the judicial branch in resolving society's conflicts, and how the Supreme Court, the structure of the courts, how they interpret law. And so it gives them the background knowledge that they need for this part of the inquiry project where they have to talk about court cases. The third lesson in this unit, citizen participation, of how you can make a difference in a democracy. There's very little with this lesson that they're going to need, if any, to be successful with the inquiry project. So in terms of planning your inquiry project, you want to look at the unit, the project itself, and then go through the lessons that are within the unit to pull out what you need so that they can be successful on that inquiry project. All right, so let's get back into this inquiry project. So the students have had we've gone through the lesson. They should be able to connect their assigned scenario with the First Amendment. And we want to make sure that they're able to do that, because if they're not able to do that, then it's going to be a challenge for them to move on beyond that. Then consider what they know in the court cases. Okay, so a couple of things. There's a resource out there called iCivics. They have lots of information. It's free. They have lots of information about court cases that you can use that are written at a student-friendly level. Also, within the Civics program itself, in the Civics library, are the Supreme Court cases. The students can go through these Supreme Court cases. Now, there are several, so you probably want to guide them in a direction and help them with this, because many of these have nothing to do with what their inquiry project will be about, but some of them are. So, for example, in the classroom when I did this lesson with my students, sorry, let me get back to our whoops, well, that is other than where I was. Okay, so when I did this with my students, I gave them examples of Supreme Court cases for them to read, and then they had to determine which one's related to their case or not. It's just your preference. Also, in terms of researching Supreme Court cases, there are lots of other websites that you can give to your students, and it helps them read case court summaries that are in Kid Talk. At any rate, you'll see that they are needing at least 1, 2, 3, 4 court cases to help them decide if that action is protected or not. So they write the name of the court case, they describe it, and how it relates to the scenario. So then, based on what they learn in the court cases, do they think the behavior in the scenario should be allowed? And they have to use evidence to support their answer. And then finally, not finally, but the next step, write a report on your scenario to give to the class, and your presentation should be 5 to 10 minutes long. Describe the scenario, clearly state your group's opinion on whether the behavior in the scenario should be allowed. Use evidence and reasoning from court cases to support your claim, and clearly and accurately cite the court cases, including a strong conclusion. And then finally, consider the freedoms and limits of school speech. Use the information you learned from your research and the class presentations to create a recommendation to your school district superintendent that addresses what kind of speech and behaviors are protected by the First Amendment. So if you think about the context of teenagers and where they're pushing the limits, often many of them do relate to the First Amendment and the Fourth Amendment as well. And so you can take something like this and you can incorporate the Fourth Amendment as opposed to the First. There's a lot of variety that you can use within this. And it really is about them owning their learning. So you have, if you go through this, there's some, it just connects those lessons. And then the part about the lesson that we didn't use for this to support the inquiry has to do with how citizens can make a difference. So you see how this action and them taking action is about being a good citizen and taking action. But I'm scrolling through this, you can see it's a more expanded view of what this inquiry project entails. I'm going to jump into another program and show you the first inquiry project from U.S. history in 8th grade, because to me, I think that this is an incredible. Let me find this program real quick. This is just an incredible video that is like starting your year off is with this. Whoops, let me find. Let me jump back. I think I misplaced where I was. Here it is.
Maps are useful tools that show where things are on Earth. They can also help you learn about the history of people and places and the interactions between them. There are a few essential elements that can be found on any map. A map's title describes the area shown on the map and identifies the main topic of the map. To indicate directions, mapmakers include a small diagram called a compass rose. The points of the compass rose are labeled with the cardinal directions: north, south, east, and west. The points in between, such as northeast, are called intermediate directions. Many maps include a map scale, which tells you how to read distances on the map. For instance, an inch on a map might equal 10 miles
Gonna fast forward through
from the beginning, and continues to do so today.
So for this one, the foundations, they give you click on this, exploring a compelling question of your choosing, and then complete a student-directed inquiry. Gather evidence throughout the activities, reading and additional research to write an argument that answers the question by the end of the unit. So for this one, you're really looking at brainstorming. So they encourage them to brainstorm a list of questions by looking through the unit. And then as they complete the lesson readings and activities, they're going to narrow down the list of questions to one compelling question. And then they need 2 or 3 supporting questions that help them explore their compelling question. And this is one of the examples that I say, I think that you need, even though it's student directed, you probably are going to need to support them a little bit along the way, because some of their questions may not be compelling, for lack of a better way to word that. So if you're using a student directed inquiry at the beginning of the year, you probably want to provide a little more support, because once you get past the supporting questions or get into the supporting questions, those are harder for them to do on their own if they haven't created a good, compelling question. So that's just my little teacher tip to you all to help you. The brainstorming part is great. The kids do a really nice job with that. Then when they get it down to a compelling, they need some extra help and guidance with what is a compelling. Sometimes they'll get into the supporting questions and then they realize that those aren't really the right questions for that compelling question. It's not going to help lead them to that. And that is where some extra support is needed. So that's my best advice on student directed inquiry and what that looks like there. I'm going to stay in this program and I'm going to go into, let's see, I think we have some in the chat. Yeah. Okay, so Matt, you want to address that with the
Yeah,
inquiry
I was just
project?
gonna tell you, I was just fielding some questions in Q&A, and I think we got all of those answered. But in the chat, some of the people are like mentioning that they're having a hard time finding them. So I just want to address that as so in TCI, every few years, 6, 7, 8 years, we'll come out with like new versions or what we call new editions. And a lot of times software updates will be across the board, but sometimes features like the inquiry project, like what Amy's been showing you guys, might be in a newer edition. Now, the great thing is you can still get access to that. So what you want to do is when you go into your program, check the edition. Now, for middle school, for example, inquiry projects are in all the third editions, okay? With the exception of our History Alive, the United States through modern times, there's inquiry projects in the second edition because the second edition for that program is the newest one, but the third edition is the newer ones. So if you don't see those in your program, check which edition you have and you can talk to your district and they can switch you over to the new edition for no extra charge. So just throwing that out there.
Thanks, Matt.
Yep.
Well, and I wonder too that definitely look into that and the idea that you can and just from teacher to teacher, I can tell you that that if you can get access to the third edition, you can still use everything like the text, the lessons that support the inquiry are going to be in that second edition. I think I'm saying that correctly, right, Matt?
That's
That
correct. Yep,
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, so your students themselves, if you can get, so basically, if you want to get into the inquiry projects, your students could have access to, if you have a print text in your classroom, for example, your students could use their print textbook from the second edition and be really successful with those, with that. So thanks, Matt. I really appreciate your help with that. So let's take a look at revolutionizing the colonies. Let's see what we have in store for us with this inquiry project. So the inquiry project for this one, explore the unit's compelling question. Would you have joined the revolution? Then complete a guided inquiry. Gather evidence throughout the activities, reading and additional research to write an argument that answers the question by the end of the unit. And so one of the things too, and I really should have mentioned this earlier, is that you don't have to figure out as a teacher if it's a guided inquiry or a student-led inquiry. It gives you some tips there. So at any rate, but you see how like really they're taking ownership for their learning with these inquiry projects. And then the other part about it too is that you can transfer, once you get into the inquiry projects and the idea of this, you can transfer some of these and make them your own if you teach another class that is not, that you do not have a TCI curriculum for example. You can still use this and then support your students. And it's getting them to think and getting them to explore and discover resources that they'll be able to use. And then thinking about, we need problem solvers in our society. And these inquiry projects themselves really lend themselves to problem solving. You can find them in a variety of the programs too. The Geography Alive program has inquiry projects. I'm going to jump back. Let me get back into our school. Nope, don't need that one. Let me go back into another program that we have and show you one from 6th grade from Ancient World. Since it looks like we have mostly middle school teachers on here. Let's take a look at ancient Greece. That lends itself to. So in ancient Greece, this one's an embedded action inquiry. So we're going to, let's take a look and see what this is. Brainstorm a list of issues or problems that you see in your school, community, or state that are related to the topics you see in the unit. This one's great because Greece has a lot of conflict in it. That unit, there's just a lot of human to human conflict, and then human man environment conflict. And so this is great. And then you get into some arguments. What's the person or group? What's the problem? What actions taken? The evaluation of evidence, cite your sources. And then choose one issue that's important to you, circle it on your list, and this issue will be your focus for the rest of the inquiry. And explain why people should care about this issue. List specific sources that verify this is an issue. And then what are some different ways to address the issue? Like list the pros and cons. And how will you address the issue? So think about creating informed citizens and kids that are going to make a difference in our society. And these inquiry projects really support that every step of the way. Hi, Kathy. It's okay. I love that you had two insane kittens. I actually got up to use the bathroom earlier and I came back and my cat was in my seat. You want to contact your district administrator to see if you can update to the 3rd edition. Matt Mormon says they can do that at no cost. So, oh yes, same Matt. I just saw that you answered that.
Yeah, just one more thing about the different editions and stuff. So when you have a license to TCI, whether you've had it for 1 year, you've had it for 5 years, you have a license to TCI programs in that grade band. So as long as you're within your grade band, so K5 is a grade band, 6, 8, 9, 12 are grade bands. So you can access any program, not just the one you teach. So a 6th grade teacher could access an 8th grade program and still have their 6th grade program and still not use up an extra license. Likewise, you can have the 2nd edition, the 3rd edition, both of them at the same time and not use up. So if you're not in the edition you want to be in, you just want to look into which one you have a conversation with your admin team about, especially if they control which programs you have, your administrators. And if you're not getting anywhere, reach out to our customer service team and we can help you out.
Thank you, Matt. So I think that the best, so if I could, in terms of simplification, I could run with my 2nd edition, gain access to the 3rd edition just for the inquiry project, print those pages that my students would need, and then run everything through the 2nd edition, pretty much, right? I could present the inquiry project, but then, yeah.
Yep.
Perfect. Perfect. Absolutely. And also just keeping in mind too, that one purpose of an inquiry project also is to enhance. And it's not the only purpose, but it can be used that way. And also to support your families who,
Hey, Amy, real quick, while we're on the just kind of taking some questions, there's a few people that have some questions in Q&A that I thought I'd give you a chance to address since you use this with your students so much.
Sure.
So there's a question about how some best practices or tips on how you would grade these projects.
Oh,
And
right.
like so grading is one thing, and then I'm going to kind of piggyback with this other question. It's kind of related as well. And then is it best practice to do the inquiry throughout the unit and then kind of keep going and revisiting, or is it best to kind of have them do everything kind of at the end and then the grading?
Okay, I'm going to start with the last one first. You really want to introduce the inquiry project at the beginning and then support it throughout the unit. Because I've done I've done it 3 different ways. I've done it at the very beginning and then tried to have them do it, and then they don't really have the skills and the content they need to do it before the unit starts. So that was a mistake I made. You probably don't want to do that. I've also done it at the end, and then I felt like I teach middle school. So for my middle schoolers, they needed more. Okay, look at what we did today. All right, what did we learn today that we can add to our inquiry project? So for me personally, and this is my own teacher tip, you can take it or leave it. And you're the king of your kingdom. But for me, you introduce the inquiry project, you get them excited without taking, but just the excitement. And then you can keep as placed in your room an anchor chart. For me works well because I can just have a poster, and then we go through. We talk about what we're going to need for our inquiry project. Then when I go through the lesson, whatever we've done in that lesson that then they could add to their inquiry project, we add it then. And so I do it throughout the course of the unit. When it came to the compelling question one, if you remember, I showed you one in US history, but I used one in civics. What would happen is they would brainstorm their questions by looking through the unit. And to be honest, their questions weren't very good. I'm just being real. And so then after we learned some, I'd say go back to your questions and revise your questions. With that though, and I'm going to go ahead and actually, I'm going to take you into that one that I did so that you can see what this looks like. Because what happens is they whoops, I should have clicked on I apologize. I should have clicked on the inquiry project. They would go back, but there really wasn't room for them to keep their notes. So if you look, see where it says start typing your lessons, your questions right here. So what would happen is my students then would be reluctant to want to erase what they already wrote. And so then we ended up adding Post-it notes with different things that they learned. And then we ended up even having to tape some of those Post-it notes because they were falling off. But the idea is it's great to brainstorm, but once they've been reading, they should have more to add. And they should be able to make their questions better. Having model questions for them would be helpful, but at any rate, I highly recommend you start the inquiry project before the unit, and then you work on it throughout the course of the unit so that they have everything they need. And it also kind of helps to keep you focused on what you want them to get out of the lesson so that they can use it on their inquiry project. In terms of assessing, you can create rubrics for these. Also, if you look, for me personally, when I go through, like, let's take this one since I'm up here. Actually, I think if I scroll down, this is probably a more expanded version. Okay, so to me, the step one, that's just a check. You've done it, right? Because there's really no right or wrong for that. Then once they start to build arguments, source, and evidence, I'm still just checking over them, kind of like a batting coach, to make sure they're using the proper approach. I don't start grading until they get into actually this final part where they're having to communicate their conclusions and they're having to create things. And for this, to me, it's a rubric. I think, to be honest, it would be fantastic if TCI created those rubrics. Hint, hint, Matt Mormon. So it is, and you just make sure that but if you guide them every step of the way and you think about this inquiry project as being them owning their learning, then the actual quote unquote grade, it's not as big of a deal because they're going to be there, and it's going to look a little different for every kid too. It depends on how your district and your school wants you to assess your students as well. If they're only assessing benchmarks and standards, then you're going to have to pull those out. So, and also one of them, the one that I introduced before that I started with, the limitations of free speech. Remember that a lot of that was done in a group. And so then for me, when I did that, then I had to have them, the letter that they wrote with the recommendation, that was their individual grade, because I have to hold my students individually accountable. And I used a rubric for that, as opposed to the stuff that they did as a group, then help them be successful as an individual. So that was kind of a scaffolding piece, if you will. But yeah. And honestly, I don't even know if I have all the answers for the grading, because because it's, I'm still learning too. I'm one of those people that's still learning to be a better teacher tomorrow than I am today. But I found that using, the rubrics, it just would be great. And I would love for TCI to create them and help us. And with that, you can always go to that little help button at the top of your this is a great opportunity for us to show this, Matt Mormon. If you go up here to this little support button up here, you can provide some feedback. And they do listen. in fact, I'm gonna submit it for us all. We would love for TCI to create rubrics for the inquiry projects. Please. There we go. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get back into our experience in a TCI lesson. I'm going to go back into here real quick, all the way in the back. I've shown you a embedded action inquiry, a guided inquiry, a student-led directed inquiry. I didn't get to the structured inquiry, but here's an example for you. How much are we able to know about human civilization? From the rise of civilization in Unit 2 of Ancient World. And we are here to support you every step of the way. I love your questions about assessing. And I also want to say a lot of teachers ask questions in our Facebook group, and other teachers answer their questions. And we also have some TCI facilitators in that Facebook group who can help guide you in the right direction. It's a great community. The in-app professional development is awesome to help navigate our resources and become even better at using the TCI curriculum. And then the TCA newsletter, they tell you the features that are coming up. It's just, it's positive. I love being part of a group of people that are problem solvers and trying to make the world a better place. Brian Thomas has done a great job with that in-app professional development. And then I do still, I know that Brian Thomas had a session on being a TCI coach while you all were with me at the Inquiry Project. However, I do want to let you know that you did not have to go to that session to be a TCI coach. It's how I got involved in TCI back in 1999. I did a lesson on the Articles of Confederation and a TCI lesson, and I was floored with how engaged my students were, the quality of the lesson, and that's when I knew I wanted to do more and know more. And so that's how I became involved in TCI. I joined a group of people who were using TCI, and we learned even more about Teachers Curriculum Institute. And if you are someone who loves working with teachers who are passionate about making a difference in social studies and our students, it is the right group for you. You can help new teachers. You can model TCI lessons. Well, anyone could share feedback. You don't have to be a coach to do that. I just showed you that one. But you do just get to be a part of a dynamic group of people who want to change how social studies is taught. And you get swag. That's super awesome. Everybody loves free stuff. And everybody loves a little recognition every now and then. And then your fun moments. You have a hashtag TCI Summit 24 fun moment you want to share, and you get entered into a drawing to win a $50 Amazon gift card. And the beginning of August is just next week. So I don't know about you, but I go back to school August 2nd. And then your reflection. If you could go ahead and throw it in the chat, how are you feeling about inquiry projects? And what do you think? How do you think they would work with your students? How do you think they could drive student learning? To me, it's a dabble, you gotta, it was one of my stretches over the last 3 years is I wanted to incorporate them. So I've been in the classroom 29 years and I'm still learning. So thank you so much. And Matt Mormon, where do we go from here? Whoops, let me get that off of my screen.
The session ends from here. So you close it out, Amy. You get to they're finished. We want them to take the survey. So there's a QR code there for the survey.
Mm-hmm.
And tell them, Amy, about how they get the Tumblr again.
What? How do they get the Tumblr?
Yes.
They take the survey.
The survey gets them the Tumblr. Okay, awesome.
Yep. Yes. So, and they get credit for being here. So like so just so you know, when you went in and you registered for our event today, we have your email. But if you take the survey, they have your information, and then you get free swag and a certificate of attendance. And I think that's it.